And now the Conservative Party, we've always been led to believe, well, they are the true nasty party. Since George Osborne's age of austerity delivered £30 billion of cuts to welfare, housing subsidies and social services, Labour have painted the Tories as grasping, avaricious and mean. The Tories robbed the poor to pay the rich, Labour cried. And this was Angela Rayner's take.
Cannot get any worse than a bunch of scum, homophobic, racist, misogynistic.
Like I said, working crass. But under Labour, we're about to enter a new age of austerity that could make the Osborne years look like a tea party. Let's start with the winter fuel allowance. And here's what Keir Starmer said about energy bills in 2022.
And that's why the Labour Party has a fully costed plan to freeze energy bills this winter. Under my leadership, Labour is on the side of working people. And under my leadership, we can have a fresh start for Britain.
Freeze. Well, with £300 less in their meters this winter, will it be pensioners who are freezing? And here's what Rachel Reeves also said in 2017. She said this: "I'll never forget the woman I spoke to in my Leeds West constituency who had freezing hands and purple fingers because her pension wasn't enough to pay for her heating." Well, it seems that she did forget about what that pensioner said to her in Leeds West. And here's what Angela Rayner tweeted also back in 2017. Labour will protect the triple lock on state pensions, maintain the winter fuel allowance and free bus passes for pensioners. And yet, after all of their bluster in opposition, just 24 days into power, you guessed it, Labour scrapped that winter fuel allowance for a majority of pensioners anyway. And worse, Labour robbed that £1.4 billion from the elderly and they gave £10 billion in inflation-busting pay rises to their public sector chums. Now that is the action of a nasty party. Let's stick with pensioners for a moment. In 2017, when Theresa May proposed to lift the cap on social care costs, Labour dubbed it the dementia tax. But a month ago, Rachel Reeves quietly axed Boris Johnson's £86,000 cap on social care. Under Labour, your life savings and even your house could disappear to pay for your social care. So Labour introduced their own version of a dementia tax and barely anybody noticed. Now that is the actions of a nasty party. And next, thanks to the green-eyed mantra of net zero, you're hammered with ULEZ schemes and low traffic neighbourhoods. By 2030, they'll come for your car. And all of these disproportionately hammer the working poor and, of course, the elderly. And I put it to you again, those are the actions of a nasty party. In October, expect punishing tax raids on the haves to pay for the have-nots, like the £8 billion per year in unemployment benefits paid to 1.7 jobless immigrants, or the £6.6 billion annually we spend on our asylum bill. What about the £11.6 billion that the Labour Party has pledged to foreign climate aid? Under Labour, people who never paid in a penny will win the jackpot, and people who've paid in all of their lives, well, they will pick up the tab. Make no mistake, it's the Labour Party that is the true nasty party. OK, now let's get the thoughts of my panel. And tonight I'm joined by the superstar Telegraph columnist, and that's Alison Pearson, Lord Bailey, the Tory peer, and of course Matthew Laza, former Labour advisor. Welcome to the show. Thanks to have your company. Let's start with you, Alison, if we could. So, the Tories were always portrayed as the avaricious, grasping, mean types. Are we seeing a new era? Suddenly the biscuit tin is empty, still blaming the Conservatives, of course, but are we about to see a real meanness from the Labour Party?
Well, Labour always said austerity, it's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice. And now we're seeing Labour in government and they're making choices, because certainly taking the winter fuel allowance away from 10 million pensioners is a choice. And the fact is, Martin, is that these are not super wealthy, comfortable pensioners. The cut-off point is the pension credits limit, and that is people earning about £12,600 a year could be losing this winter fuel allowance. And as you said in your introduction, they're happily giving £11.6 billion in overseas climate aid. I mean, that's just basically code for, dictators in Central African republics buying a new Mercedes diesel, isn't it, really? And another example, which I've been very concerned about this week, we saw David Lammy. Israel, as everybody knows, had the horrible grief and shock of 6 of their hostages being executed by these absolutely monstrous Hamas individuals. And David Lammy thinks that's a really nice time to stand up in the House of Commons and announce that we're going to be cancelling some of the weapons contracts deals with Israel. And that has caused absolute outrage, not just amongst so he's thrown the Jewish community under the bus. Israel's furious. Even the chief rabbi was furious. The United States is not pleased. And even Arab countries are not very pleased. And I thought that was the nastiest thing you could do to a really good country that's been a friend to us and is in a terrible situation. So they're doing quite well for not, as you said, private school children under the bus, special needs children, pensioners, you name it. Yes. So they're doing quite well. And Labour was able to pretend for 14 years to be compassionate. Be kind, Martin. They say, be kind. Lots of this is not kind.
Matthew, let's bring you in at this point to defend your beloved party.
Oh, I'm going to have an evening of it, I can see.
You're sort of in the corner there getting a bit of a pacing.
No.
The point is, Alison makes a great point. This was a political choice. The winter fuel allowance didn't have to be axed. £10 billion went straight to public sector workers. Not a good look, is it? You have to admit.
Well, I mean, public sector workers deserve the pay rise that they're getting. These were the independent pay review bodies. Frankly, the Tories would likely have accepted that anyway, because and they put off accepting it. The winter fuel allowance is something that, nobody in the Labour Party wanted to do. This was a Labour policy introduced by Gordon Brown. Yeah, they have done it because the cupboard is bare, because there is no money left. And, I mean, there is a case for the winter fuel allowance.
That's £10 billion for the unions.
Well, it's 10 billion. It's not big 10 billion quid for the unions. It's 10 billion quid for doctors, nurses, teaching assistants, teachers, police officers, and the army. I mean, it's not 10 billion. And on the winter fuel allowance, let me just put the case briefly for the winter fuel allowance, which is that what's happened is that fuel poverty amongst pensioners has halved over the past 25 years. Pensioners as a group have also, general poverty has gone down considerably. The problem is, I don't think the government thought through the problem, which is and obviously the winter fuel allowance went to people on not just 50, 60, 70 grand a year, but to millionaires as well. The problem is, as Alison says, it's a blunt instrument because people just over the pension credit limit, so people on 15, 20 grand a year have been hit. And I think that is a very political difficulty.
Talking of blunt instruments, Lord Bailey, you look like you've been hit over the head with one a minute ago.
Don't hit me a one with one.
Matthew was saying, there isn't a great deal of poverty around anymore, but the Labour Party have been saying opposition for years and years and years that the Tories have driven everybody into poverty.
Well, poverty for working people has remained constant.
There's two things to take from your notion that this is the nasty party. The real thing here is hypocrisy. So you look at all the tweets you showed, you look at all the statements they've made, they've constantly said the Tories this, Tories that. It turns out they're awful. And I pointed this out on a show over a year ago. Keir Starmer, very hard left. He's pretended to be cuddly and nice, but the demonstration of taking 10 billion away from pensioners and giving it to what many people would consider highly paid train drivers, etc., is not a good look, and it is a fact. The pension, the removal of the winter fuel payment is very mean because it comes so far down the income brackets. That's really bad news for a lot of pensioners who will struggle. The exact same people in Labour claim to be supporting all the way through the election.
Now, Alison, all eyes on Tuesday, of course. This is going to go to a vote.
Yes.
Now, they were badgered into doing that vote. They didn't want to do the vote. Now, I reckon a canny party will just be looking at everybody who votes in favour of getting rid of the pension winter fuel allowance, because they are going to be the most grasping, meanest MPs in Britain. The Labour Party will win this vote, but could they lose public trust?
Well, they'll win it comfortably, but they didn't want it, did they? They didn't want a public vote because they knew all these people, as we've talked about, been able to sort of say, oh, we're so virtuous, we're so compassionate. Well, suddenly they're going to be exposed. They're going to be faced with the fact that there are going to be people in their constituencies. And I know what Matthew's saying about this cut-off point, but the fact is there are pensioners in this country, they're too proud to claim this pension credit. So that's probably a couple of million people, and people are going to freeze to death.
Yeah.
And you remember Labour saying, you know, eat or heat. That's the choice. So now that's going to be true of the Labour Party, and we are going to see...
So, what the government's promised is it's promised to do because there's lots of people, millions of people actually, who are entitled to pension credit who don't get it. The government said it will do a big push to increase take-up. Interestingly, that is likely to end up costing more than the winter fuel allowance.
But this is the point. People won't believe the government because the Labour Party said, well, we won't take away the winter fuel payment. Bang, it's gone. So now people are in a case where they won't believe it. And here's the real thing. You have many young Labour MPs, brand new, who have no idea what it's like to be on the hard side of the argument. They're about to get a barrage. The reason the government didn't want this vote, because they're well aware this is the first of 1,000 cuts.
And politically, it could haunt them, because it'll be on their voting record forever. You voted to axe the winter fuel.
Oh, yeah, you can see the leaflets now.
That'll be a leaflet through the door box.
It's like tuition fees, isn't it? The Liberals didn't recover from that.
Yeah, what basically is the thinking behind this was it was a short, quick thing to do. It was clean, simple, get it done in July, and it wouldn't become a political row. The political row has obviously become massive.
The thinking behind this was we'll do it early on in our first term, and people forget about it by the general election. They won't, because for some people this can make a fundamental difference to their life.
But they're playing favourites, Martin, because what they're doing, the Israel arms thing, that was all about playing to their Muslim client base. That was nothing to do with thinking about what's good for the Jews, what's good for Britain's relations. We rely on Israel. 10% of NHS medicines are from Israel. We rely on intelligence, vital intelligence about terrorists from Israel. And then when we see the playing class war with the private schools, thousands of children are going to be, out of school.
I mean, there is a political, because 63 is now the age at which you're more likely to vote a Tory than Labour. So obviously do the maths and work it out. So I mean, there's a cruel political calculation there.
This isn't just about who directly votes. It's the message it sends about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. It looks authoritarian, it looks two-faced, and people will remember that. The important thing about Parliament now, everybody's majority is slashed. This is a big majority the government has, but it's a very shallow one. And this will be the thing that means a lot of those MPs will be one-termers.
OK, first big test for Keir Starmer on Tuesday. Thank you so much, Alison, Sean, and, of course, Matthew. Excellent start to the show.